Welcome to the fourth episode of Amplified. In this episode, we'll hear stories from Jimmy, Rudy, and Asia. The date of Jerusalem's destruction is an integral part of Jehovah's Witness doctrine. They believe Jerusalem was destroyed in 607 BCE, because if it wasn't, then Jesus did not begin ruling in heaven in 1914, as their timeline dictates. What few Jehovah's Witnesses know is that for decades, they taught that Jerusalem was destroyed in 606 BC instead. Their book, Revelation, Its Grand Climax at Hand, on page 105 contained this quote, "Providentially, those Bible students had not realized that there is no 0 year between BC and AD. Later, when research made it necessary to adjust BC 606 to 607 BCE, the 0 year was also eliminated, so that the prediction held good at AD 1914. All the evidence they said proved Jerusalem was destroyed in 606 was shifted 1 year to 607 BCE. Why didn't they change the 1914 date? Because they were doctrinally trapped. They couldn't change a date that was so pivotal to their beliefs. Without 1914, they also couldn't have the 1919 belief that Jesus selected the Jehovah's Witnesses, called Bible students at the time, to be his earthly people. And from there, everything would unravel, including the faithful and discreet slave teaching, which gives the governing body their power. In the first story related by Jimmy, researching the date of Jerusalem's destruction helped him to wake up. His research went in a unique direction thanks to a talk by the circuit overseer. Every voice needs to be heard, and every story can help someone. Jimmy is from the United States. This is Jimmy's story. My waking up process began in late 2010 or early 2011. It was years in the making, though. There were always little things that would eat at me, things that didn't add up, things that I just found hard to believe. I always just dismissed these things as my fault. I wasn't paying attention at the meeting that explained this. I didn't read that Watchtower Awake. Maybe I was sleeping during the talk at the convention that explained this. And so I just kept going. I remember asking my parents questions and getting explanations. In time, those explanations I even began to question. These questions grew into doubts, even as a teenager. Doubts about disfellowshipping. Even as a kid, it seemed to me that it put people in a difficult spot if they simply didn't want to go to meetings anymore. Doubts about talking to people with opposing views. I would frequently go on service with my mom. One time she placed the Watchtower and Awake with someone, and they offered a leaflet of their own from their church. My mom said, "If you come knock on my door, I will take it, but today I won't." Looking back on this event years later, this is just a cop-out. She never had any intention of taking any information from any church. She was banking on the fact that they don't go door to door, and the unlikelihood that they would find her even if they did. In reality, she wasn't allowed to look at information that opposed her views. Why not, though? If we really had the truth and everyone else was lying, it would be very obvious. It would even strengthen our faith that we are indeed in the right religion. It was in 2010 that I was forced to face my doubts head-on. It was then that my wife and I began to talk more seriously about having children. I knew that I would then be looked to as the spiritual head and teach my child things that I wasn't convinced of myself. I decided that I would put these doubts to bed through research. I thought, maybe if I understood the organization and its teachings from its very beginning, its roots, it would all make more sense. So I planned to get my hands on all the C.T. Russell and Rutherford books as possible. It didn't take long to find that these books were not so easy to come by. I needed another plan. Perhaps I could study the same book that brought both my parents into the organization, the Truth Book. My mother was contacted through the door-to-door work, and soon a Bible study was started. She was baptized in 1973, using the book the truth that leads to eternal life. My dad followed her 2 years later, getting baptized in July of 1975, studying the same book. I found a truth book at my local Kingdom Hall, the same version my parents would have studied decades before. I brought it home and began to read and study it, the same way my parents would have done nearly 40 years earlier. Read the paragraph, look up the cited scriptures, and find the answer within the associated paragraph. I get to chapter 11, where it talks about Matthew 24, verse 34, this generation. At this point, I remembered only a few months earlier there was a watchtower on this topic. I was aware that this watchtower had some new light, but didn't fully understand what this new light was. I thought this is the perfect time to do some additional research. I wanted to understand why this teaching went on for decades and understood a very specific way, and which scriptures were used to back this teaching. I also wanted to know why this teaching changed, and what scriptural backing was used to not only change the teaching, but also support the new teaching. I found it interesting that in the very Watchtower article that was used to release the new teaching, no scriptures were used to show support. Late in 2011 was my next pivotal moment in my waking up. My wife and I were at a meeting for field service at a home local in our area. It was my father-in-law, an elder, that said something that would plague me for years to come. He made a comment about the Watchtower magazine we were presenting that day out in service. He said that he really liked one of the articles because it proved that Jerusalem was destroyed in 607 and not 587 like many experts believe. The article he was talking about was, When Was Ancient Jerusalem Destroyed? Part 1, in the October 2011 Watchtower. It never even occurred to me that the date was even a matter of debate. It was just a given that it was 607. Why would I question that, and why would they lie about that? We were doing return visits that day. I sat in the car and read that article, along with part 2, which was in the following month's Watchtower. Why were JW so sure that it was 607? I went to Google and typed in, When was ancient Jerusalem destroyed? 587. How could Google get this so wrong? I set out to find where Google made their error. I researched the lineage of kings and compared these lineages with Watchtower and Google. Both were the same. I researched the regnal years of each king. Google and Watchtower both agreed. One difference I found was that Watchtower did not give the regnal years, which Google did, but I was able to find an anchor date that both Watchtower and Google would agree on. The fall of Babylon. From the fall of Babylon, only simple math is needed that gets you to 586/587. In the months and years to come, I would pay attention at meetings and conventions in a very different way than I did in the past. I would listen to not only what was said, but how it was worded. My frustration level reached its peak in early 2016. No answers for the generation teaching and no answers for 607. And I was just beginning to learn of the child abuse cover-ups within the organization. For the first time, I would visit an apostate YouTube channel. I simply typed into Google, Do Jehovah's Witnesses have the truth? One of the returns was a video from the XJW Critical Thinker channel. The video was, Jehovah's Witnesses, former Bethelite elder leaves. In this video, JT speaks of 3 reasons why he left the organization. One of the reasons was because of the change in doctrine regarding the generation teaching that I had heavily researched a few years before. I realized then I was not alone. I was not crazy. I watched more of their videos and many others. I began to learn that I was not alone regarding 607, the depth of the child abuse cover-ups, and so much more. In 2017, I attended the Don't Give Up Regional Convention. On Friday afternoon, it featured a video that depicted a scene from 1975. It mentioned that back then, some were looking toward a certain date. Even though I was aware of 1975, for whatever reason, I was immediately brought back to my childhood when watching this video. My mom had a collection of cassette tapes that I would rummage through from time to time. Mixed in with these tapes were talks she had recorded. I remember one of the tapes labeled in her handwriting, Fred Franz, 1975 talk. I set out to see if any of my siblings had kept any of these tapes. None did. So I turned to Google once again and simply typed, Fred Franz, 1975 talk. To my surprise, there was a return with a link to a talk given by Fred Franz in early 1975 titled, Time in Which We Are Now Interested. I downloaded this talk and started listening to the same talk that my mom and dad had listened to decades before. This added to my issues with the organization and the video, which falsely portrays witnesses and likely my mother and father as some that were looking toward a certain date. I had more questions. Why were some looking toward a certain date? Were they looking toward a certain date because of what they read from the Bible? Or from what they read in Watchtower publications? Fred Franz himself helped answer this question in this recording. He makes it very clear in this recording that 1975 was expected to be some pivotal year with very special significance. Once the pandemic started, I was well on my way to becoming physically out, mentally out, or POMO. The pandemic helped me get there. At the beginning of the pandemic, the preaching work was shut down, and our congregation, like many others, went into a letter-writing campaign. This campaign was the end for me. I can honestly say that I never wrote one letter, and I never turned in another time slip after March 2020. It was so obvious to me that this was simply busy work. This is an organization that believes the preaching work is a life-saving work. David Splain was quoted as saying that this pandemic was one last warning from Jehovah. If this was true, why go through the time-consuming effort of handwriting letters? This is an organization that owns several high-speed web offset printing presses that were sitting idle during the pandemic. This is an organization that is happy to fire up these presses during convention season or memorial season to print invitations to the public. But no such effort was made to save the lives of billions at the onset of the pandemic. The organization was perfectly content to have their followers handwrite letters each and every Saturday morning. My wife would typically write 4 letters in 2 hours each week. Imagine if the organization printed a single-page professional-looking letter. 1 or 2 short paragraphs would be all that's needed. This one page could have these paragraphs with several languages on this single sheet that followers could fold and put into envelopes each Saturday. They could do dozens each hour instead of 2. It would cost the organization fractions of a penny to print single-page double-sided flyers. The machines are paid for. The labor was free. The only cost would be energy used by the presses and cost of materials. Even a for-profit company could print millions of these for pennies per sheet. One of my last Zoom meetings I went to was in November of 2020. It was the week of the CO. The talk he gave was called, Are You Marked for Survival? In it, he talked a bit about the destruction of Jerusalem. He stated, Maybe you don't believe that Jerusalem was destroyed in 607. Maybe you don't believe that Nebuchadnezzar began his rule in 624. Well, if you go to a museum in Florence, Italy, you will find an onyx stone that establishes Nebuchadnezzar beginning his rule in 624. See, even historians agree with our date. I became infuriated when he said this. A topic that I had been plagued with for nearly a decade, he attempted to dismantle it in 1 or 2 sentences. After I thought for a bit, I thought, maybe, just maybe this is the one piece of evidence I am missing. Maybe this will make it all make sense. In all my reading of 607, I don't remember reading about an onyx stone, so I set out on another research campaign about 607. I searched for museums in Florence, Italy that might have exhibits on ancient Babylon. I narrowed it down to 4 or 5 and emailed each one of them on their contact us page. I told them I was doing research on the destruction of Jerusalem and was recently told they had an onyx stone that proves Nebuchadnezzar began his rule in 624. I got a reply from each of them. In each case, they told me flat out that 624 was impossible and provided several reasons why. One of the museums did in fact have the onyx stone that the CO was talking about. Their reply was as follows. The stone you mention is indeed in our collections. We generally assume a date at the very end of the 7th century BCE, after 605. Therefore, I am curious about your proposed date of 624 BCE, given that the Battle of Carchemish and the defeat of the Egyptians on the Euphrates is commonly dated to 605 BCE, and the fall of Nineveh by the Babylonians and the Medes' armies is established at 612 BCE. Raising the chronology of Nebuchadnezzar by 20 years would have enormous historical implications for the whole Near East. Unfortunate for the CO, we don't need to go to Florence, Italy to fact-check him. We just need a decent internet connection and a desire for truth. It was shortly after this meeting I stopped going altogether. I simply could not stomach the meetings any longer. Even though my wife is still me, physically and mentally in, we still make it work. We don't talk religion much, which is fine with me. I do struggle with the fact that she is indoctrinating our child. I do find comfort in the fact that my child will at the very least have an option in our house. I try to teach her to think for herself and not take people's word as fact unless she has proven it to herself to be true. I try to teach her how to think instead of what to think. Speaking personally, I find I have less stress and anxiety in my life now. Stress that was a result of being part of a cult where you are constantly being told you're not good enough, not doing enough, not spending enough time in service, not reaching out for privileges. This organization wants the one thing from you that you can never get back. Something more valuable than any amount of money. Our time. Rudy is from the Netherlands. This is Rudy's story. Growing up in a household with a JW mother and an older brother has laid the basis of me being quite schizophrenic between there's nothing out there and the end is coming. At 25, I finally reached the point where I faced the inevitable, face the truth or keep wondering. So I went to my brother and said, "Convince me there's a God and that your religion is the only true one." He didn't quite succeed, but I filled in the gaps in my faith from unsatisfactory answers with falling for the persuasive, unknowingly used love-bombing tactics JWs and cults have in common for new members they have high hopes in. I got baptized and pioneered for 7 years, and even went to the school for ministerial servants. My typical Dutch humor got me into trouble with the teachers there, for on the first day the question was raised, "Name a teaching which is inspired by Satan," and my answer was, "Forbidding to marry," with a smirk on my face. For those who don't know, students of that free 2-month-long course for unmarried ministerial servants and elders were not supposed to get married within 2 years after graduating, to be focused on serving the congregation they were assigned to within that period. No surprise, I got the counsel that I seem to have a problem with authority, which to a Dutchman is somewhat of a compliment. But as a brother in a worldwide theocratic organization, it should not be. I pioneered on for a couple of years in a congregation which can be labeled as a pioneer's grave, mostly alone in the service while most other brothers pursue a worldly career. No wonder I now have no pension fund to speak of, or a work experience or higher education to make life easier in later years. But to be fair, being in the truth and pioneering absolutely made me a better and socially adapted person than I was before. I fell in love with a sister, married, and after a couple of years became an elder, serving on several committees, including alleged child abuse, which happened far too long ago to have any significance, but the stepdaughters just wanted to destroy an elder of our congregation. But such things have to be dealt with as well. Moving to Germany was a shock to me, since the elders in my new congregation didn't trust the Holy Spirit, which had appointed me, and would rather judge for themselves if I was fit to meet their standards of what they wanted as an elder to come in and support their body of elders. Skipping a bit further in time, with the whole JW broadcast coming up, I got a yucky feeling of an electric church taking over the organization I once held so dear. I slipped into a mild depression and found that rejoicing in the truth was not so simple anymore. Questions came up like, where's the new light coming from? The terrible JW broadcasting videos and the slick linguistic programming in there didn't help either. So I voluntarily stepped down as a ministerial servant because I felt bad for the younger brothers who were putting in so much more effort than I to even be considered as a ministerial servant. Studying on in the Bible, it turned out that whenever the general public, which publishers met working from door to door, were too well informed about a subject, the doctrine changed and was bent in line with what science found out. The age of the universe, of the earth, all that stuff, from literal 6 days of creation to 6 periods of creation to, what do we know? Everything kept getting more vague, and questions re-emerged that I had swept under the rug in my initial studying to answer the baptism questions, since I was convinced that the brothers will know best. Then someone from England I met on a gaming platform posted something about JW's calling at his door, and he said, well, if you can show me from the Bible that the earth is round, I'll become one of yours. He said they left without an answer. Ah, easy, I thought. Isaiah 40 verse 22, right? Imagine my surprise when I expected an English translation in the New World Bible of Het rond de aarde, in Dutch into a literal translation in English, the round, meaning spherical form of the earth, and to my shock and horror it being translated as the circular earth, and in German, der cirkelförmige Erde. It turned out the English King James and the German Lutheran Bible, on which the New World Translation in English and German are based, were translated before it was scientifically established that the earth was a globe, a sphere. And so the Bible translations kept that scientific truth in their translation, and the brothers who wrote the New World Translation didn't dare to change that to fit their doctrine of the Bible being scientifically correct. When the King James Version and the Lutheran Bible were written, the so-called science said that the earth was a circle, not a sphere. The Dutch Statenvertaling, though, on which the New World Translation in Dutch is based, is written after the explorers sailed around the world and it was scientifically proven the earth is a sphere. So the Bible translators translated the Greek word into het rond der aarde, meaning the round earth, a word which suggests more of a sphere than a circle to the modern reader, and the explanation the Watchtower gives on that is an insult to our intelligence. From that, I kept stumbling on and on over key teachings from which I can only gather that new light or new insight comes from science, and evolving common sense becoming common knowledge amongst the householders which we call upon, and not divine intervention with Watchtower organization teachings. Whenever an argument couldn't be won anymore with the common householder, there suddenly was divine new light on a subject. So I astonished my wife, predicting there would come new light about the 2 witnesses being needed to verify a case of child abuse, the need to publicly say sex crimes could well be reported to worldly authorities, the shunning, the generation, etc. I still hope one day I wake up, realizing how stupid I was ever doubting the dear brother's guidance, and some of you gleefully say, yeah, serves you right, but then it's too late. It's no use talking to the elders about this, because they are sure to set flame to the stakes they gathered to solve the problem, which is me, before the circuit overseer returns to see if they herded to the flock. Asia is from California, USA. This is Asia's story. I was introduced to the organization through my dad's uncle when I was about 4 or 5. I got married to who I thought was a quote-unquote spiritual person, but he cheated on me. The elders told me to stay with him even though he put his hands on me and abused me. They said that he didn't do it that many times that I should be divorcing him. When I divorced him, everybody shunned me as if I was disfellowshipped. The elders constantly harassed me, sending me certified letters saying that I need to have a meeting with them. I never responded. Eventually, I contacted XGW critical thinkers, and they stated that the only way to stop them is to tell them that I will pursue legal actions against them. My ex-husband's friends and family have shunned me because I divorced him. Until this day, 4 years later, they have shunned me. They have not done anything for me. I have had a miscarriage and no one helped me. Thoughts of suicide and no one helped me. I'm now in therapy going through EMDR sessions, which have helped me. My son now also goes to therapy. I finally left officially without being disfellowshipped. I have a wonderful boyfriend who loves me and cares for me. I've been through racism and misogyny from the elders, and also accusations and countless committee meetings. I'm so glad that you're exposing these people for who they really are. I grew up with 12 elders, one of them being a helper to the governing body right now, and it's really sad to see how much trauma they have caused. That concludes our 4th episode of Amplified. Thank you to Jimmy, Rudy, and Asia for taking the time to share their story. If you'd like to tell us about your Jehovah's Witness experience, please see the description for details. Thank you all for listening, and see you in the next video.